You say that democracy is an asset insurance for the rich.
Yeah.
What does that mean?
All right. Here's the deal. This one became a hashtag at one point. The Hamptons is not a defensible position. Right. So if you go out to East Hampton and Southampton and Northampton or whatever the hell they're called on Long Island, it's where all the hedge fund guys live and the billionaires and all the rest of it, right? It's very nice, like huge houses, ridiculous. But it's all low-lying beaches, right? Mm-hmm. And it's on a peninsula. So ultimately, when they come with the pitchforks, there's nowhere to go. It is not a defensible position. Democracy is asset insurance because if you pay enough to redistribute from the enormous stack of wealth that you have, to stop everybody else picking up the pitchforks, you get to live in the big castle at the end of Long Island. But if you all start to skimp on the payments and hide it in tax havens and declare every time that somebody wants to raise a tax to be an assault against liberty, then you're asking for it. That's why democracy is an asset insurance, and we've been skimping on the payments.
So what is the? I don't see an end. It seems is this revolution going to happen? I mean, I don't see. If you could give me 5 more minutes just to explain what's happening in Greece, because I'll tell you what it looks like to me, and then you can correct me. So the European Union, I don't understand how they expected it to work, because when an economy goes south and it needs to deficit spend to get itself out of a crash in the economy. Yeah. So when you have to deficit spend, well, now the countries inside the European Union, they can't deficit spend. So now they just do austerity, which just makes things worse. So am I right about that? And if I am, don't they realize this?
Well, the problem is it's hard to deficit spend when you don't have a currency. They don't have a printing press.
Right.
So the whole idea was, because economics kind of got a bit mad over the past 2 decades and full of itself, that there were no more business cycles and that full employment happened automatically so long as everybody was flexible and priced things correctly and banks were allowed to do whatever they wanted, because that was always good. And of course, that was all exposed as nonsense. But the entire architecture of the EU presupposed that you would never need a government to have fiscal capacity, because when they do that, it just ends up causing inflation, and that's always bad. So you sign up to an agreement where you basically burn your printing presses and you hand it over to the Germans in the ECB, and their only job is to fight an inflation which died in 1924. So you have a set of architectures which are completely useless for the crisis that you're in. But the rules clearly say you can't do this, and you don't have the capacity to do it. So you can't inflate because you can't print. You can't devalue because you don't have your own currency. So the only thing you can do is default, which would blow up the entire European banking system, which is twice the size and twice as levered as the US banking system at the time of the crisis, right, by the way. And if you do that, you destroy all of the economies of Europe. Or you do internal devaluation, i.e. you cut spending like you're on some kind of monstrous health kick diet, and you hope that that placates the markets enough so that the pressure on the bond market goes away, and then you can figure out some plan B to get out of the mess you're in. There is no plan B.
So didn't they see? I mean, it looks obvious now. I mean,
no, they didn't see it. I mean, you got to remember, Ben Bernanke in 2003 published a piece called The Great Moderation that basically claimed that central banks and inflation targeting and correct monetary policy and correct micro policy had together produced a convergence of forces such that the business cycle had disappeared, inflation had disappeared, and all we needed to do was basically do a little bit of tweaking of the interest rate and everything was fine. That's the way we thought.
That's amazing.
Yeah, I know. It's called progress.
So, you know, a lot of people said what Barack Obama should have done was break up the banks, fire the people who ran the banks. You know, he got rid of the head of GM when he bailed them out, but the banks, they're just untouchable. And to me, it just seems like our economy is being run by a cabal of criminals who extract wealth from economies instead of investing in those economies. And A, is that correct? And B, what can we do about it?
All right, so is it correct? Again, I'm going to go with a yine on this one, right? Either you believe in something called systemic risk or you don't. And now, what's systemic risk? We used to think the following was true. If you made a bank safe by making sure that it had the right controls and the right risk models and the right amount of capital, right, a kind of cushion of money that if got into trouble it could basically survive, right, then the system of banks was safe. And because banks had skin in the game, they were the ones who were the most self-interested, so they would make sure that everyone was okay. That was literally a regulatory framework. Now, that made sense if you didn't realize the following. A, they were all gaming it. B, they didn't have any skin in the game. They were using your money, not their own. And most importantly, all the banks are interconnected. They all borrow from each other. They're all each other's creditors. They're all each other's lenders. They're all each other's borrowers. They all sell each other stuff. So when one of them goes down, it takes down the whole damn thing. Now, if you take down the whole damn thing, and there's no money in the ATMs, and people are living hand to mouth, and 40% of Americans, I believe it is, would have a really hard time getting $2,000 together if their life depended on it, what happens in a nation full of angry people with guns? All hell breaks loose. So, in a sense, if you buy that story, you have to bail the banks. It's not an extortion racket. It's an unfortunate necessity. All right. Here's another story. That's complete horseshit. Because basically, even though these banks are big and interconnected, they could have failed. You could have ring-fenced mortgagors and depositors. You could have let the bondholders take it because they've got all the money anyway. And essentially, you're just protecting the rich. And the whole thing about the CDS market, which is the insurance market through derivatives, that if you didn't bail this, the whole world would end. It's like me writing an option on you, you write an option on me, and nothing happens when we cancel the contracts, right? So there's another version of the story which is horseshit, right? Now, here's the story. Here's the problem. I believe both. I cannot differentiate between the two. And neither can most people, because both of them are equally plausible. Now, do I really want to take a gamble on the solvency of the entire global economy on a hunch that they're full of shit? And I want to call them on it? Or do I say there is probably something called systemic risk? It's unfortunate that these guys have got us by the proverbials, but that's the way life is. Now we try and do some regulation to make sure it doesn't happen again. That's called Dodd-Frank. Now, where are we now? We're about to get rid of all of Dodd-Frank. We're about to go back to a model where the banks get to do whatever they want with whatever capital cushion they want. We will create another bubble. We will create more credit that people shouldn't be taking on with stagnant wages. And we're absolutely seeding the ground for another crisis. And it's called the Choice Act, and they're about to put it through Congress now. The weird thing is half the people on Wall Street actually realize this and don't even want it, but it doesn't matter. The Republicans are going to give it to them anyway.
So what do you, well, it doesn't sound good. I was going to ask you what
you talked about climate change.
So does that kind of trump everything, climate change in a sense?
Yeah, of course it does. And that's why we never talk about it or pay attention to it, because human brains are just not equipped to deal with this. It's just on a scale that we can't deal with, right? And imagine an iceberg moving at 0.003 miles an hour towards the sea. No, I can't. That's really hard, right? Imagine a quadrillion tons of water. What are you talking about, right? We just can't deal with that. And also the notion that the externalities that we produce by our own actions, consuming, breathing, walking around, doing our stuff, is actually destroying our children's future. It's just an incredibly hard ask for people to just take that on full bore. So we're all in denial. We're like smokers who always pretend that somebody else is the guy who gets cancer. So we just don't take it seriously. So
to me, it's like, that's a great analogy. What I say is, we're a bunch of adult children of alcoholics in America, where we don't we don't get mad at the alcoholic or the guy screwing us. We get mad at the guy who points out that there's a guy screwing us. And
yeah, that's good. I like that one. It's a good one, Jimmy. Definitely. But let me give you some optimism on this one, because it's not as bad as it seems, or it doesn't have to be as bad as it seems. First of all, a lot of these policies are driven basically by the boomer generation. They're the only generation in human history that's managed to increase its consumption all the way through the life cycle. They've cut taxes on themselves all the way through their lives. Now they're terrified of death taxes, death panels, and they're going to spend 20% of GDP trying to live forever in the last 6 weeks of life, right? That's a problem. Well, society evolves one funeral at a time, and millennials now outnumber them, but millennials don't vote. So lesson number one, millennials out there, stop being silly. Get out, get organized, and get real with your politics. Then actually demand change. Congress will listen to you, because once the other guys are gone, you're the only people left. It has to happen that way. Second one, technologically, the only way we're really going to deal with climate change is not through intergovernmental agreements with 200 governments, half of which are going to cheat. Right. It's going to be technology. And there are technologies out there in batteries that are coming online. There's some really amazing stuff whereby now you can basically build a house and you put a roof on it. It costs exactly the same as a normal roof. It's entirely solar. We're a couple of years away from wall-sized batteries where you could be 60% off-grid any standard house that you would build. We just need the investment. And we need the investment in green tech. Now, if we don't do it, if we have the climate change government in denial here, then who's going to do this? It's going to be the Germans. The Germans have already signed up to something called the Energiewende, the energy change. They have the Mittelstand, this incredible engineering complex. They know that if they crack green tech, usable green tech, they will sell it to the rest of the world for 100 years. And they'll be able to sell it to the Chinese, who will take it to scale because their air is already unbreathable. So that's the axis where it's all going to happen. And we're going to basically take our heads out of our proverbial backsides 8 to 10 years from now and go, oh shit, turns out all this stuff's real. Somebody should have done something about it, right? Kids of alcoholics response, right? And at that point, we'll need to buy it from the Chinese and the Germans. Whereas we could be demanding investment now, getting our companies ahead on us, creating jobs with this, and dealing with the greatest existential threat that's out there. And I'll say this in defense of the Democrats, had Clinton actually won this round, we would be a lot closer to being in that position, because those people may have their issues, but they do understand this. What's truly terrifying about this administration is the fact that it just pretends it's not there. So you've just given America a 4 to 8 year hiatus on basically the only tech that matters.
Yeah, so instead of investing in green energy, you know, I voted for the candidate who had a Green New Deal, so I feel proud of myself about that, because you're saying that that's a great way to get out of this. I agree, and we're going to pass it. We're going to let it go. And, you know, it's a falling down of the media. You know, we don't have really an independent news media anymore. It's owned by the people they're supposed to be investigating. You know, even MSNBC, which is owned by Comcast, they never tell you that company is voted one of the worst companies for workers in the world every year, and we got a bunch of liberal talking heads taking $30,000 a day not to ever mention that.
Can I give you my favorite Comcast moment?
Sure.
2 years ago, I lived in Baltimore, and it was when they were bringing in high-speed internet, and it totally wasn't high-speed internet. So I had some guy basically being paid $2 above minimum wage, who was the technician who was coming out to fix this, who just asked me every time, have you reset your modem? I'm like, yes, I have. Right? It's a total disaster. So eventually I cancelled the service. I got a phone call from a woman at Comcast. She goes, is there anything that we can do to make you come back to Comcast today? And I paused for a minute and said, yes, the resignation and ritual suicide of the entire senior management team. And she started cracking up laughing. And I said, I'm sorry, I hope this call isn't being recorded. She goes, oh, it is. It'll probably cost me my job, but it's worth it.
Yeah, that's Comcast for you.